Hello friends, welcome back to my channel. So this is going to be my October wrap-up. I know that spooky season is over, but I always find that fall and autumn is just the time that I'm wanting to read spooky scary books, so perhaps you could pick up one of these this month or read them during spooky season next year. So I managed to read quite a few books, some winners, some not so much, so I will go ahead and get into it. Horrid by Katrina Leno. This is a contemporary horror mystery about a girl named Jane and her mother Ruth. They move from California to Ruth's childhood home in a small town in Maine after Jane's father unexpectedly passes away, and all the people in town seem to know that something is off about the house, and Ruth starts acting cagey and strange, and Jane starts experiencing things that she isn't sure is real. This was a 4.5 that I'm rounding up to 5. This was a really fast read, a little over 300 pages. It's a slow build up to a climax, a really punchy and intense climax that I really enjoyed. You have an unreliable main character, strange and supernatural things happening at this house, but this also centers a lot on grief and loss. My only real complaint is, and this is just truly a personal preference, is I was frustrated with how the mom clearly knew more than she was letting on, but just refused to explain things to Jane. I usually don't enjoy that sort of miscommunication trope when it could have been avoided, but I really enjoyed this. Fantasticland by Mike Bockoven, narrated by Angela Daw and Luke Daniels. This is a horror thriller that takes place in a fictional theme park in Florida called Fantasticland, and a really bad hurricane hits and traps a few hundred employees in the park, and by the time rescue arrives weeks later, many of them are dead. There's blood and mutilated bodies everywhere, and the book is made up of a bunch of interviews with people who worked at the park in hopes of shedding new light on what happened. This was a 3.5 that I'm rounding down to 3. I was definitely entertained by this, and the narrators were very good. There are a lot of different voices, dozens of different POVs that they had to do, and they kind of switched up their voices every time. You have to go into this with a bit of suspended disbelief, which wasn't that hard for me. I actually expected it to be more gory than it was, but a lot of this book is just about survival. It has a Lord of the Flies sort of vibe. I think the author put a bit too much stock in the lack of internet being such a huge factor in why everyone just went feral, but I tend to believe that the right circumstances will make anyone do terrible things. So this book was just a dramatic spectacle, and I enjoy carnivals, theme parks as spooky horror settings, so this was entertaining for me. 56 Days by Catherine Ryan Howard. This is a mystery thriller that takes place in Ireland right at the start of the COVID-19 pandemic. And well, it's actually a split timeline that swaps primarily between the meeting of the main characters, Sierra and Oliver, and then 56 days later when the Irish police discover a dead body in Oliver's apartment. Sierra moves in with Oliver just weeks after meeting him because of the institution of lockdown. They don't want to stop seeing each other, so they combine households, and Oliver is hiding a dark past. I think this is probably also 3.5 stars, but I did decide to round up. It's a slow burn, but there was nothing that ever like really got my heart racing, but it was intriguing the whole time. You eventually get to see the perspective of both the main characters in the same moments, just from different perspective, which was interesting, seeing both of their thought processes. This might make you think about second chances and if everyone deserves them. And reading a book taking place during COVID was interesting. It brought back good and bad memories for me. It plays a big role, COVID plays a big role all throughout this, and it had a couple good twists. A Dowry of Blood by S.T. Gibson. This is a historical fantasy following the first bride of Dracula named Constanta after he saves her from death in her village in what must have been like the 1300s or 1400s. And she is desperately obsessed with him, but he is a very abusive and terrible person, and you follow her throughout the centuries along with a couple other lovers that he brings into the fold with them, and she starts to realize, you know, the hold and power that he has over her. And this was immaculate. 5 out of 5 stars. It was super lyrical, but I actually loved it. Stunning writing. I'm not normally drawn to flowery writing, but this was just stunning. It was so dark and tragic and just haunting and sexy and just like a lot of other adjectives, and it was a super easy read, really fast. And this was mostly vibes, bloody velvet vibes, and the author just nailed it. And it's also super gay and polyamorous. So yeah, I loved this, highly recommend. And there is actually a sequel. It's not out yet, but I think there is a sequel on the way, so I will definitely want to check that out. The Burning Girls by C.J. Tudor, narrated by Gemma Wayland and Richard Armitage. This is a mystery thriller that takes place in a small religious town called Chapel Croft. A vicar and her daughter move there, and there are local superstitions and secrets and history that they start to uncover, and the daughter starts seeing visions of girls who were burned as martyrs hundreds of years ago. I recently learned that this is getting, or has, a TV adaptation as well. I gave this 4 stars. At times, things slowed down enough that I started to get a little bit bored, but this has 3 different plot lines, so things would either like shift perspective or get interesting again before, you know, I got too impatient. I wish that the supernatural elements had played a bigger role, which is a personal preference, but I think that this was a solid thriller with some good reveals. I like stories that involve, you know, the church mixing with evil, so this was a good one. The Haunting of Hill House by Shirley Jackson, which is, you know, the quintessential haunted house book. This is about 4 strangers who stay at Hill House to try and research and observe paranormal phenomena. And one of them, Eleanor, seems to be strongly affected by the house in particular and starts to kind of get sucked in. And I'm sad to say though, I gave this only 2 stars, rounded down from 2.5, I guess. And mostly personal preference again. I think I was just not jiving with the writing style. The characters have no substance, and the dialogue was almost like nonsensical and childlike, almost. Definitely not realistic, at least in modern standards, and I don't think people talked like that back when this was written. There were some scary scenes and descriptions of the house, but I personally want more narrative and character substance than this book had. So all respect to Miss Shirley Jackson, but this was not for me. I've watched the first episode of the show, and it's already definitely more scary than this whole book was to me. All These Bodies by Kendare Blake. This follows Michael, who is the son of a sheriff who wants to be a journalist, and one day a local family is murdered, and at the scene of the crime there is a girl named Marie who is alive, soaked in blood, but suspiciously there's almost no blood on any of the bodies, and none of the blood is hers. She is taken into custody and says, for reasons, that she will only confess her story to Michael and no one else. And I want to say that this book is about learning what really happened through his interviews with her, but that's not true, because you learn next to nothing about anything this entire book. This was a 2 out of 5 stars, maybe rounded up from 1.5. The plot of this is Marie talks to Michael for 5 months but says nothing at all. She is not likable, interesting, or helpful to anyone in any way. None of the characters are interesting. There are some supernatural elements hinted at that never amount to anything. Very few things are solved by the end. It was just not a good story. The author's prose is honestly fine. It was a very easy read, but this story was boring and poorly executed. And the last thing I read in October, a newer release came out this year, Yumi and the Nightmare Painter by Brandon Sanderson, luckily closing out the month on a high note. This is a fantasy standalone about 2 strangers, a girl named Yumi and a boy who goes by Painter. And Yumi is a very powerful priestess of sorts who is able to summon spirits, and Painter protects his city from these creatures called nightmares. And the 2 of them end up becoming connected with each other and have to work together to save both of their worlds. And this was 4 stars. It was very touching, very introspective. I think this is the first Cosmere book that features romance, like focuses on romance this heavily, and it was actually well done. And as always, incredible world building by Sanderson, and the ending was so intense and emotional. I think that the pacing dragged a little bit, which is why this isn't a 5-star. Lots of great commentary on the meaning of art and inner strength, and I don't know, just the way life is. There's some great quotes in here. And you'll never be more invested in reading about someone stacking rocks than with this book. I do think you'll get a bit more out of the narration and some of the dialogue if you've read other books from the Cosmere, maybe even more so than with Tress of the Emerald Sea. That also kind of had the same situation, but it's not crucial. So those are the books I read in October. Got through quite a few, both audiobook and physical book, and most of them are all horror. This is not horror. Ooh, this is not horror, even though it has the word nightmare. There's some kind of creepy scenes, but it's not scary. But I really read a lot of horror and thrillers, a lot of things that have been on my shelves for a long time. I'm going to unhaul a couple things, so that'll be nice. So it was a very good month. I had a lot of fun reading kind of scary, spooky thrillers. So thank you so much for watching. I am reading some things in November, trying to get some last check marks on my Beat the Backlist reading challenge. I'm not sure if I'm going to be able to black out the board. That's kind of been my personal goal. I have a bingo at this point, but I was hoping to be able to do all 64 prompts. I'm not sure if I'll be able to do that, but the next thing I'm going to read, it's November, I'm going to be reading the Scorpio Races, which takes place in November, and it fulfills the horses prompt, so that's nice. But yeah, so anyway, those are the things I read in October. Hope you found some good recs or some commentary on things that you haven't read before but were interested in, and I will see you guys in my next one. Bye!